Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, it is a beautiful Tuesday, September 12th, 2017, and let's learn some StarCraft. Today's particular topic is going to be a grand introduction to strategy. Now, later on down the line, in future videos, there will be more specific things like how do you open in Zerg versus Protoss? What are good units to build versus Terran if I'm doing this? And all these sorts of specific details, but I want to start with some high-level general concepts that are underpinning everything, beginning with the number one most important thing that I will tell you in the entire series, strategically speaking. StarCraft is about having more money, okay? Alright. Now, a lot of you are going, okay, sure, okay, right. But I want to actually dig into a little more detail on this, and I'm going to show you, again, the most important video that you will ever watch, ever, in this show, okay? If it will play, there we go. It's me with 6 Siege Tanks versus 12 Dragoons. Now, Siege Tanks are an extremely good unit versus Dragoons. They tend to just win in even fights. 12 Dragoons does cost more than 6 Siege Tanks, but the Siege Tanks are extremely efficient in this particular fight. However, Protoss can solve this problem with the exact same type of unit, just by having more of it, right? Now, there's not even sophisticated micro happening from the Protoss, and Protoss is losing a pretty good amount of stuff, but Protoss is going to end this fight with like a ton of stuff left over. Look at this. I mean, it's almost, what is that, 11 Dragoons? That's like a lot of Dragoons left over. And the thing that's important about this is that this kind of underpins all of the important thinking that actually goes on in StarCraft. Specifically, there are other strategy games in which you will look at what he's doing. Maybe he's building thing A, so you respond by building thing B in your base, and he responds to that by doing thing C, and so you need to build D. And when people will learn those strategy games, I don't just mean RTS, I mean actually just in a lot of general strategy games, a lot of the question is what beats what counters what. Even if you're coming from a game like Dota, there's a lot of discussion of what hero is good against which other hero, and therefore what item should I buy under this specific circumstance. Coming from StarCraft 2, there's a lot of that as well. You know, like, oh, he is building armored units, so I want to build immortals, and so on and so forth. But in Brood War especially, it is so important that you understand that more is the big underlying thing to everything. So many of your problems are solved by answering one of the following three. How do I get another base? How do I stop him from getting another base? How do I protect my bases? And I messed up, there's a fourth one. How do I kill his existing bases? So how do I take one? How do I deny him taking one? How do I hurt his things? How do I prevent him from hurting my things? And this is fundamental. You can always analyze pretty much any strategy as how it's doing one of those four things. And again, in the future, we're going to get more detail about specific matchups and so on and so forth, but we're going to be referring to that a ton. Because remember, a lot of the wrong thing beats a little of the right thing every day of the week. Now, there is still important stuff to be noted when it comes to how units behave, but they behave a little differently than, you know, in StarCraft 2, if that's where you're from, or in other RTS games, even like Age of Empires, things like this. In a lot of games, it's about what thing of mine counters what thing of his. He's building rock units, therefore I must build paper units in order to counter that. A little bit of that exists. Siege Tanks are a little bit better against Dragoons than Dragoons are against Siege Tanks. Vultures are a little better against Zealots than Zealots are against Vultures. Things like this, they exist. But there's really two important concepts to how units are interacting with each other. One is that strong units, strong spells, strong things in StarCraft tend to be very immobile. Siege Tanks siege into the ground, right? They can't move. Mines place onto the ground, and then you can never move them for the rest of the game. Reavers are really slow. Storm is on a specific location. Defensive structures are very cost-effective, but they don't move. Dark Swarm is on a specific spot. Lurkers burrow into the ground. Even the ultra-powerful air units like carriers and battlecruisers move really slowly. And on the flip side of that, mobile units tend to be very weak. They tend to be very fragile. Things like Mutalisks can easily be taken down by a single good Irradiate, or Zerglings can get blown up by mines, and so on and so forth. And what this means is that typically, one player will have a stronger army, and the other player will have the more mobile army. And there is some nuanced detail of specifically what are the units that are there. But again, if we're just trying to lay foundational concepts in front of you, like more money is how you should think of all strategies, I want you to think about units in terms of this way. I want you to think about the strong units versus the mobile units. And each of these will have different characteristics. Classic strong armies include things like siege tanks and vultures. Things like Reavers, Templar, Lurkers, Defilers. These types of units tend to be very, very good at holding positions and expansions. So you will see Terrans do this where they will take a third base, make some buildings in a wall, and put siege tanks behind them. You will see strong armies tend to be able to win straight up fights. In fact, that video piece that you just saw is a really clean example of this. This one. Come on, show. Damn it. We're going to rewind it. This video piece shows this very well, right? 12 Dragoons just cost more than 6 siege tanks. The Dragoons are the more mobile army. Siege tanks are the less mobile, but they're the stronger army. But of course, you can see that the Dragoons could have retreated from this virtually at any point in time. So that is an advantage that a lot of strong armies tend to have, is that they're good at winning straight-up fights. They also take a little bit less APM to manage because you sort of set your units up and then there they are and you're done and you're in good shape. And so if your army is strong and slow, you are basically trying to deflect types of aggression and you're trying to force some engagement that the sort of weaker mobile player doesn't want to do, like that 6 tank versus 12 Dragoon thing. Let me move to the next slide. Now, mobile armies, you can think of them as being the sort of flip side. With mobile armies, they're not necessarily good at holding expansions because of the fact that, well, the units are weaker. But if you have fast units that are out on the map, pushing all the way back the opponent's army, it's really easy to take expansions behind. It's super easy to just build an expansion because that slow-ass guy has to go all the way over in order to just kill it. If you have a mobile army, it's very easy to harass other expansions and pressure other expansions. The probably biggest advantage that a mobile army has is that it's great at retreating, and the mobile army gets to choose when the fight happens. The classic example is the Terran player who has tanks and vultures, very slow, very sturdy, very powerful units. And you never really ever get to force Protoss to fight you unless you're making Protoss defend an expansion. The Terran will often move out, siege up, and Protoss just pulls back again. And so if you're a mobile army, your goal is to get more money. You're going to have a less efficient army, but you want to get a lot of expansions, you want to counterattack, and you want to win by just having overall more stuff. And this is what comes back to this clip that I showed earlier. This comes back to this 6 tank versus 18 Dragoon clip. If you are a mobile army, such as these Dragoons here, you can easily take lots of expansions. You can easily overbuild lots of these wrong, weak, not as good units. But because you have 1.5 or 2 times as many units as your opponent, you win anyways. This is your sort of goal. And I want to highlight something that is a little unusual compared to other strategy games. In a lot of other strategy games, everyone kind of has roughly the same amount of resources in the game, and it's about being smart with those resources. That's not really how Brood War works. In Brood War, efficiency is not exactly your #1 goal. More is your #1 goal. This Dragoon army, when it's facing enough tanks, will never be efficient, ever. It will never be efficient. But it's still correct because you can kill off these tanks, you can kill off an enemy expansion, you can deny an enemy expansion, and if at the end of the game, we, the Protoss player, have lost $20,000 worth of stuff, and Terrans lost $12,000 worth of stuff, yeah, we were sloppier, yeah, we lost more stuff, yeah, we were inefficient, but we won because we had a total amount of more stuff. Is that clear? This is super important concept. This is super important. Let me open all this up again. What is the next slide? Ah, yes, excellent. This is just recapping the two big points that we just spoke about. That really StarCraft is about getting more money, and in pretty much every matchup, in every single circumstance, we'll be thinking about what pieces of the army is strong, aka good at defending, good at being efficient in fights, but not good at forcing a fight, and not good at helping take bases. And then there's the mobile armies, which will be very good at taking lots of expansion, will be inefficient, will not be able to win in a lot of direct fights unless they get too many resources. And pretty much every matchup will have this in some fashion. And the only exception is Zerg vs. Zerg, which is a big, degenerate, weird, total micro intensity fest, but that's okay. We'll wind up getting to that. What I want to do is briefly show some different types of these army compositions. Let's go ahead and just look at the classic immobile army. This is what I mean by immobile, is that it's just hard for it to do much. You plant mines, and mines are ridiculously insane value, but now they can't move. The siege tanks are only really good if they're sieged, and if you're moving up just slightly, you can sometimes see your enemy and then go, ooh, and then siege up. And then you want to plant more mines. And you're noticing throughout the entire duration of this clip, I haven't really moved very much. I haven't really done anything. This army is terrifying. It is very scary. But you do not have to ever participate in this engagement if you're Protoss or if you're Zerg. If you see this, you can always run away. This is an advantage that you'll always have. Now, the classic mobile army would be something like Dragoons and Zealots. I'm just moving them around to just show you, oh my gosh, look at that. And you have options. You get all sorts of glorious options if you have a mobile army, like this Dragoon Zealot army. You can work your way around the middle of the map, and you can see on the mini-map in the bottom left-hand corner, you can see maybe we want to try to surround from two sides. Maybe we won't want to cut off reinforcements. Maybe we say, you know what, screw fighting this army directly. We're going to go ahead and counterattack. The one thing that's important to note with mobile armies is that often they are weaker. I would say like 95% of the time, they're weaker units, they're less efficient units. And everything else mobile armies get as an advantage. I want to show this one last bit. We got Zerg here. We got the most inspiring, beautiful race of all. It is not to say necessarily that all of your army is mobile and all of your army is strong. Sometimes you have mixtures, like we have Zerglings and Mutalisks, which is again a classic mobile army, very good at counterattacking, very good at harassing, very good at working the way around Marines. But back home we might have these Lurkers and Defilers that are here in order to defend these expansions. Or up here, look at this. Boom! Watcha! And this is perhaps the, penultimate efficiency. Lurkers are not taking damage from range if they're under the Dark Swarm. So there's almost infinite defensive capability of these strong immobile units. Now this is where we actually get to see these concepts that I've just shared about mobile and immobile sort of playing out. These units right here, Lurkers and Defilers and Dark Swarm, are a little more dangerous and difficult to do attacks with, because they're not really born to do that. They're immobile units. And similarly, these Zerglings and Mutalisks are very good at attacking, harassing, and things like this. And so it's important that you understand what the identity of these various units are. And similarly, the Mutalisklings suck at defending. They really suck. There's really not a good way for them to win an even fight. Coming back to these principles, how might Zergling Mutalisk win an even fight? Or excuse me, win an uneven fight? Let the Marines come out, avoid it, avoid it, avoid it, pick off Marines, deny reinforcements, pick off Marines, deny reinforcements, delay, delay, until I, the mobile Zerg player, have more Lings and have more Mutas. I have so many of the wrong thing that I can overwhelm this Firebat Marine medic composition. And I want to show a little bit of these tensions playing out sort of in opposition to each other, so you can really see and feel all the points that I've just brought up. So in this screenshot, I am a Terran player And by the way, this is staged, just so you know. I didn't let my macro quite go to 12K, 4K. But in this particular game, what I'm going to try to do is take a command center, and I'm going to try to move it to this third base, right? Because high-level strategy is very simple at the end of the day. I'm just trying to get more. I'm just trying to get another base. How do I get another base? Stop him from getting another base? How do I protect my bases or hurt his existing bases, right? This is it. Everything sort of comes down to this. Now, in terms of the second principle I just talked about, mobile versus immobile, I have an immobile strong army. I have siege tanks and vultures. There's 12 dragoons. You can barely see the tip of them just off the screen. They're going to step in just a moment. There they are. Here's the dragoons showing themselves. These dragoons are just going to try to delay and deny me a lot. Now, there's obvious elements of this that are a little bit staged, like I am literally never going to macro in here. He is literally never going to macro in here. He is never going to choose to engage. But let's just think about all the key concepts that we just said is represented here. Well, my unsieged tanks are not really going to be very good versus these dragoons. So I'm going to try to start moving them forward. If I move them too far forward when they're unsieged, he's going to kill them off. And so I have to walk up a little bit and then siege up. Yuck. I also accidentally blocked my 2 vultures because I'm awful. Remember what I said in the introductory episode? If you ever feel like you're messing something up, don't you worry. It happens to everyone. You're doing great. You're doing just great. It will take some practice. We'll talk about some homework at the end of the episode. And so what I elect to do is I elect to start moving forward in this very solid, sturdy fashion where I am sieging a few tanks up, I'm leapfrogging the tanks advancing, and I'm poking with the vultures to just get a little vision. Whoa, look at him. He is trying to deny me from getting up there. Remember the very important phrase I said earlier. Strong armies, like Tank Vulture, that are immobile, are very good at defending existing expansions. They kind of struggle at taking expansions. You see, while all this was going on, Protoss could have easily just taken another base and there's nothing I could do about it. It's very easy for our Protoss hero to take expansions because he has a more mobile army. That is the advantage that mobile armies get. His army's weaker than mine. I will always win his army in a straight-up fight, but I just can't force it. I don't get to pick when fights happen because I'm a slow, strong army, and the Protoss is a fast, mobile army. Look at this. I'm just ripping dragoons down one at a time. Oh me, oh my. And finally, I want to relate this back to this ultra-important, #1 most significant thing you've ever heard me say, ever. This game is about getting more money. Our Protoss player lost quite a few dragoons. I, the Terran, did not lose that many expensive units. I lost some vultures. I think I maybe lost 1 tank in this. In terms of the exchange between my units and his units, I have killed more dollars of his than he has killed dollars of mine. However, this expansion got delayed, and it's easy for him to expand behind, so this still might actually be okay for Protoss. This still might actually be okay for Protoss. So I just want you to sort of keep that in mind as we are playing through a lot of these examples. Or actually, I should just say as you're playing through StarCraft in general. It's typically not as cut and dry. In fact, in like StarCraft 2, often you can just look at the supply counts in the corner and you can just go, oh, that guy has more supply than that guy. And assuming that they're roughly building the correct stuff, the guy with the more supply should win. Brood War, it's very hand-wavy. You'll hear tons of commentators say shit like, well, I think the Protoss is ahead. That was good for Terran. That wasn't the best for Terran. You'll hear these kinds of comments because it's so rare that 2 armies are actually forced to fight each other. There's so much that is focused around controlling expansions, accumulation of small efficiencies, accumulation of small gains. Now, I have no idea what it was that I wanted to talk about next. What on earth was the next topic at hand? Ah, beautiful. Okay. So, I want to come back to this big idea thing here. if my Windows viewer will display properly. And there it is. StarCraft is about getting more money and its strong armies versus mobile armies. These are two big concepts that might not make a lot of sense to you right now, and that's okay. That's okay. But I need you to remember from point number 1, StarCraft is about more money. Try to answer the question, how do I take a base, deny a base, protect an existing base of mine, hurt an existing base of his? These are the core things. And to quote the amazing Purge Gamers when he talks about Dota, sometimes you'll see someone just trying to get in fights or trying to farm in the jungle, and he'll say, dude, you're not doing anything. Yeah, you're getting money, but you're not doing anything because you're not hitting the towers. Objectives are what Dota's about. In Brood War, it's about bases, it's about expansions, it's about money. If you're trying to track his army down to fight his army, you're not doing anything. You got to focus on the bases. And the second one, your armies are connected to this money problem primarily through whether they are strong and slow or fast and mobile. Okay, what's going to be happening in the future of this series is I'm going to be looking at each matchup individually, and I'm going to be saying, here's how Terran vs. Protoss works. Here is how Terran vs. Zerg works. Here's how Zerg vs. Zerg works. We're just going to go through them one at a time. And one of the big ways that we're going to go through it is by trying to look at the early, mid, and late game. And there's some pretty common properties that exist in early, mid, and late of all the matchups. Roughly speaking, the early game is about making a play and taking a base. This is the gist of it. If you're a Protoss player against a Zerg, you might build a forge with a cannon at your front to defend against some bullshit and immediately expand. Cool. You might be a Terran against a Zerg. You build 2 barracks to build Marines and medics to make an attack early, and then you expand behind. You just doing one thing and taking a base. That's basically all you're trying to do in the early game. And yes, listen. I fucking know there's cheeses, okay? I know these exist. I'll address them. Yes, you can try to just, oh, I hope I win now. But that's not what I'm going to teach you. I'm going to teach you how to do it properly, how to hold those off, and then I'll sneak a little cheese in towards you, right? Make a play, defend a play, and take a base. It's the early game. The mid-game is where we start to actually make core armies. And when I say core, I'm talking about the base of your army, right? Like a lot of tanks, a lot of vultures if you're against a Protoss player. You might get a science vessel to do some EMPs, you might get a dropship, but it's about tanks and vultures, damn it. If the Protoss is against a Terran, it's about zealots and dragoons. Yeah. If you're against Zerg as Protoss, it's about Zerglings and Dragoons and Templar. Those are the big ones. And you might be like, oh my god, but what about the Corsairs? Aren't those core? No. Those are good stepping stone units, and I will talk about that when I address the Protoss vs. Zerg matchup. Yes. Core armies. Now, in the mid-game, there's, again, this idea of bigger armies. Instead of making a cutesy play, like maybe I can drop a Reaver and kill off some workers in the early game play, it starts looking more like pressure. Like I have a shitload of Marines and medics, let me try to kill a base. Also in the mid game, players are trying to take a base. Right? That's also it. And the late game is where armies tend to mature. There really is, and actually I just want to get this out of your head right now. In StarCraft 2, there's a lot of tech switching and sort of, I went this way and then I went back this way and I curved back around. Or even in a lot of other strategy games like I was talking about earlier, there's a lot of I did A, so he responded with B, so I did C, so he built D and I built E and he built F. It doesn't really work that way in Brood War. If you're a Terran against a Protoss, you're making tank and vultures the whole game. That's it. Good, right? Good. Understand? And what happens is that composition matures. And when I say mature, I mean there starts to be quite a few science vessels. Instead of 1, it's maybe like 5. And they're there to defend against recalls. There start being things, if you're Protoss, like Arbiters. Zealots and Dragoons is still your core army, but the Arbiters are there to help out. If you're Protoss against Zerg, we got Zealots and Dragoons, and High Templar, maybe a few Archons sprinkled in there. And in the end of the game, we start to add in Reavers, and we even add in Dark Templar as part of our core army. It matures. There's not big changes, there's just that maturation. And the late game is marked by lots of multi-pronged hitting of different locations and the taking of many bases. So to summarize, in the early game, there's going to be some small pressures, some small attacks and taking a base. In the middle game, we're going to start to decide on what our core composition is, make some attacks and take some bases. And in the late game, we're going to extend that. And we're going to build our mature army. We're going to kill some bases. We're going to take some bases. All right? Kind of just connects back exactly to what I said before. But I want to zoom in on one thing, which is that the middle of the game, the middle game, is the most important thing of all of this. For you to be able to understand and to get your bearings as to what the hell's going on, it's all about the mid-game. Because people tend to view StarCraft as like this. It starts with just 4 SCVs and a command center and just goes, and it expands out like this. In reality, it kind of expands out and then it contracts in the middle. And then it tends to expand out a little bit like that. So I want to show you an example of this using some of the most advanced MS Paint that the world has ever seen. First of all, this is what I just fucking said. Very good. I remembered my slide. Excellent. Openings, however you start the game in the early game, they tend to arrive at the same mid-game. So here is just, wow. Remarkable paint skills. And yet, this is surprisingly important of a concept for this convergence. So, on the left, we have a traditional Terran early game opening. I'm going to open with 3 barracks. And then what's the next step? Well, we're going to just get all of our sort of gas tech structures. We'll still have the 3 barracks making Marines and medics, but then we'll get the engineering bay for upgrades, we'll get a factory for tanks, we'll get the starport for science vessels, and in the end, we'll round this out by having 5 barracks and all of those things. Now, if you look at, this is traditional Terran vs. Zerg. If you look at modern Terran vs. Zerg, Terrans open like this. They go 1 barracks, 1 engineering bay to get those upgrades started fast. And then they get 5 barracks. But it still converges back to the exact same as this. You still wind up getting the factory and the starport and the science facility in order to get science vessels. There's even this slightly more outdated, but still effective opening, where you open up by getting a few Marines from 1 barracks and a very fast Vulture, and you harass the shit out of the Zerg player with just 1 Vulture. Now, this is where the idea of mid-game convergence is very useful, because if you're Terran, you can just say to yourself, I'm always gonna wind up here. I'm always gonna wind up here. So what is the best way to go from this opening of 1 barracks, 1 factory, to winding up here 5 racks, 1 eBay, 1 factory, 1 starport? Well, a reasonable thing to do in the middle is, if we're already getting the gas because we got a factory, we may as well just use that gas to get a quick science vessel and a quick upgrade and kind of a small amount of Marines. And then we'll eventually round out with the exact same of everything else. And as we go through each of the matchups, I want you to just keep that in mind, that you're going to be kind of asking yourself, what the hell is my core army that I'm always roughly going for in the mid-game, and what's my rough play in the mid-game? Because number 2 right here tends to be very similar from game to game. Now, I'm going to put air quotes around similar because the beauty of StarCraft is that there is lots of variation, but it's not variation on the scale of, this game I went lots of medic Marine. That game I went mass Goliath. This game I went half tank, half firebat. You don't do crazy shit like that. In all these games, you're going medic, Marine, tank, science vessel in the mid game as Terran. If you're playing against Zerg. You're doing that every single game. There's just the ways that you float into it are different. The number of units that are there are different. The number of his units there that are different. And this makes it a nice, understandable box to continue to explore within. So, in future strategy videos, the next one will be next week. What we're going to be doing is we're going to be exploring what is, in each matchup, the common early, middle, and late game. And I want to give some terms right here just so you have some clarity as to what each of these things means, because I'm going to use them all the time. An opening is the sort of qualitative how you started the game off. Like, he went for an early expand while he went for forge first. Right? That's very qualitative. A build order is the absolute specifics of when things were built. And there's a very particular notation, and I'm going to open up Wikipedia right now. There's a very specific notation that you use in order to discuss when you build things, and that's that you use the supply in the counter in the top right. So if you're Protoss and you build a pylon when you are at 8 out of 9 supply, we would say a pylon on 8. And when that pylon finishes, if you've been building probes continuously, you'll go, oh, I now build a gateway on 10. And just to show you an example of that, I want to show the absolutely amazing content of Wikipedia. Let's go ahead and open Wikipedia. Come on, hit me with it. Yeah, perfect. So this is Wikipedia. You can find it at wiki.teamliquid.net. It's a great resource, amazing readings to be done here. But you can just scroll down to where you see guides, and there's beginner's guides, Protoss strategy, Terran strategy, Zerg strategy. Look, I'm going to click Protoss strategy. I'm going to click Protoss versus Terran. You can see by the purple links that this is a little rehearsed. And then you'll see some build orders here. Like, look at this. This says a 2 gateway range expand. And here is the example of a build order, and I will go ahead and enlarge that. This is on 8 supply. This is on 10 gateway. This is 12 assimilator, 13 cybernetics core, 15 pylon, 17 dragoon range, 18 gateway, 20 nexus, 20 dragoon, 22 dragoon. Build orders can be super duper precise, but this is different from the opening. In opening, this 2 gateway expand. The 2 gateway expand is the qualitative name of the opening. The super specifics is the build order. So I hope that that makes sense, because build orders can actually extend deep into the game, way past the opening. The opening is, again, just a qualitative description of that. Another term that we're going to talk about is normal compositions versus unorthodox compositions. StarCraft is pretty figured out at this point. There tends not to be big, wide variations in combos of units. You just kind of need to get certain units in certain matchups. And in each of these matchups, we'll discuss what is normal and what is unusual. For instance, if you are Terran versus Protoss, it is normal for the Terran player to go Tank Vulture. It is normal for the Protoss to go Zel Dragoon. An unusual composition might be Terran going for Mass Bio. Okay. Another term is cheese. Okay, now cheese is one of the most poorly defined terms in all of RTS, or actually all of gaming in general, but it's stuff that kind of makes you angry. is a more general term, but the way that I'm specifically going to use it in this show is cheese are strategies that are trying to win right now with no next steps. That's the basic description of cheese. So this might be something like, I am going to hide 3 barracks in the middle of the map and just try to attack you and kill you, and I'm going to stop building SCVs at home to make sure I can afford these barracks and Marines. It's kind of fucking cheesy, if you know what I mean. That's what cheese is. There are 1 base cheese, 2 base cheese, all sorts of nonsense things. And there's even things that... it's basically going to be the early game trying to kill you before 6-7 minutes. That's the more appropriate term that people are using nowadays is all-in. All-in builds, you'll probably hear more commonly in just esports, but cheese was the original term for all-in, and it's sort of embodied stuff that just makes people angry. Like, people consider Dark Templars cheesy. You might not be cheesing, you might have a totally robust long-term game plan, but I just want you to know what the word means. Now, tactics. A tactic is, I want you to think about as a play that can be understood in under 30 seconds. I said that wrong. It's a play that can be executed and all happens within a short 30-second period. Like, a strategy would be something like, first I expand with a cannon, And then I go for Corsairs, and then I get Zealot leg speed, and I use Corsairs and Zealots with leg speed to protect me while I get a third base up. Notice that this is like many minutes of linking of stuff up. A tactic would be something a little more like, hey, you can put 2 tanks here, and they'll hit his workers from that range at his expansion. Oh, that's a useful tactic to know. Tactics include a lot of abusing of terrain. It includes things like specific micro tactics to make your Reavers get more value from the shuttle, from it dropping. But predominantly, a lot of the tactical and tactic things are related to terrain and sort of short-term little move here, move here, move here. Like vultures swinging around, planting mines behind, and running in to try to kill off probes. That's a nice little tactic that exists there. And the last term that I want you to be familiar with strategy is, what the hell is a transition? A transition is the idea of I'm predominantly focusing on this thing, and now I'm doing something new. So there are small transitions, like I am going 6 factory, building tanks and vultures, and now I'm getting science vessels. I'm going to transition to science vessels. It doesn't mean that I'm going to stop making tank vulture and move over to that. It's just a small transition. You're just kind of doing your next step in your game plan. There are bigger transitions, like I am a Zerg player who has been building lots of Lings and Hydra, and suddenly, boom, I surprise you by switching, by doing a big switch all to Mutalisks. Big switches and big transitions like this are uncommon. They just tend to be tiny. The biggest transition that exists nowadays is Terrans who start off building lots of barracks, doing bio. Then there's a big moment where they transition to lifting off all their barracks, replacing them with factories, and then going mech. It's the most advanced strategy in StarCraft, period. But the most common usage for transition is the next significant step. The next significant step. So, I'm Protoss. I want to transition to Templar. Whoops, I died because I didn't have Storm. I need to transition a little sooner. These are just terms that I want you to familiarize yourself with in terms of language. Now, I think that's our last little slideroo. It is. I want to recap with what we took a look at right here, because we talked about 4 pretty damn important things. The number one most important thing as your introduction to strategy, if you forget everything else, please remember this. StarCraft is about having more money. More. It is not quite about being the most efficient and having the most clever composition. It's not quite about being really surprising or tricksy. It's not quite about doing something unusual to subvert your opponent's preparation. It's about just getting more shit. It's about getting more. Second thing we talked about, mobile armies and strong armies. What are the qualities to them and what are their sort of roles throughout the game? And when we go into each matchup more in depth, we'll be exploring which units fall under that category. The third thing that we talked about was the way that early, mid, and late game function. And the most important thing from that bit is that things converge in the mid game and give you a sort of goal to work towards. And once again, please defer to the future matchup-specific videos to see what the implementations of those are like. And the last, we just got some common language to make sure that we're on the same page. I'd like to stress one thing that I brought up in the middle of this. Did I even close that? No, I still have it open. Excellent. Liquipedia is just an amazing resource. It's just incredible. It has tons of build orders all over the place. You can see different build orders that have different qualities to them, and there's all sorts of articles written. Look here, harassment focus, here are some mid-game strategies, and so on and so forth. Never do the stove. It's just a joke build. Don't ever do it. That sort of thing. Now, the next video segment that we're going to be doing right after this is going to switch gears and do a rough introduction to mechanics. That'll be a little bit of a shorter one. Following that, we're going to do a video on managing your base effectively, and that's going to have some homework assignments. On Thursday this week, we're going to do an overview of each race. We're going to talk about every single unit in every single race. We're going to talk about roughly how the race plays. So again, you have a little bit of a benchmark. What you'll probably be feeling that's missing is specifics. You'll go, great, I want to take bases. What the hell's the first thing I should build? It's going to be in future videos. And all I really want you to do right now is play some games that are team games, use map settings, play against the computer, hell, even play just by yourself, managing your base and just building some stuff up. Just get a little comfortable, get a little bit of information. Don't try anything too specific. So we're going to go to a very short break, and then we're going to talk about mechanics.